Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, a third of the population of South Uist turned out to protest against ferry cancellations. They are rightly furious that this month every ferry to their island has been scrapped. Reports today quote Christina Morrison, who runs the Crofton Queuing near Loch Boysdale ferry terminal. She said, "We don't want compensation, we need compensation. Jobs and businesses are on the line because of SNP failures. So will his government compensate islanders for his mistakes?"
First Minister.
First and foremost, Presiding Officer, can I recognise what disruption that has been caused by the failure of that ferry, that has been caused by the breakdown of the ferry in question. So nobody in the government, certainly not I as First Minister, am doubting the significant impact on the South Uist community. The former Transport Minister did, of course, visit South Uist and indeed North Uist. He also spoke to the South Uist Business Impact Group as well. So we do understand the level, the degree of disruption that is taking place to the community. What I will say is that, of course, we will look at what we can do to support business. I have looked previously at the issue of compensation. It's been raised in this chamber, rightly so, by a number of MSPs across the political chamber. The reason why we haven't, for example, brought forward compensation is because the money that is deducted from CalMac in terms of penalties and fines, what we do is we reinvest that back into the resilience of the network. An example of that, of course, would be the £9 million that has been spent to charter the MV Alfred. That is being funded, or partly funded, I should say, by those performance deductions from CalMac of around £1 to £3 million a year. So I will continue to listen to the calls for how we can support business. As I say, it's not off the table because we know the community in South Uist do often get affected when there is ferry disruption. So I will continue to keep an open mind on that question. Of course, CalMac are doing everything they can in their gift to ensure, of course, that they bolster the resilience of the network.
Douglas Ross.
I'm not sure the First Minister grasps how urgent and critical this is, and he says he'll keep an open mind and he recognises the problems in South Uist. His answer there was almost verbatim to the answer he gave to Donald Cameron 2 weeks ago about the issues affecting islanders on Mull. These endless cancellations are leaving businesses in despair and costing jobs. So let's go back to South Uist. One islander, Gary Young, said takings in his business were down 70% since the ferry service was cancelled. But it's also about more than the damage to the local economy. The disruption goes far further than that. Mr Young said, "The ferries are affecting me at my work and my family life." He added that his son has allergies and they're forced to wait for medication to arrive. And he gave this stark warning: "It has made us question how long we will stay on the island. The SNP failures are risk driving people away from island communities." So does the First Minister recognise that it's not only businesses that need compensation, but everyone who has had their lives turned upside down by these cancellations?
First Minister.
As I said, Presiding Officer, my first answer, of course we recognise the disruption caused, not just to businesses, but of course to island communities who depend on these lifeline services. So we absolutely recognise that impact and that disruption. And that's why we are committed to, for example, ensuring that we have 6 new vessels in the network by the end of the parliamentary term. That is why, of course, CalMac has invested £9 million to ensure that we have the MV Alfred chartered to, again, try to bolster that resilience across the network where we can. And when we look at the overall statistics in relation to scheduled sailings that have taken place, we know only 1% have been cancelled due to technical issues. But clearly that 1%, those cancellations, that almost 2,000 cancellations that take place due to technical issues, clearly have a significant impact on the communities, and in this case, in the community of South Uist. The other promise that we've made and commitment that we have made is that we know that it's often the Loch Boylesdale service that is the one that is impacted and affected because of what's called the route prioritisation matrix. So when there is a breakdown, CalMac have that matrix, use that matrix to determine where, for example, vessel redeployment has to take place. CalMac have acknowledged, and I believe they're visiting South Uist very shortly to have that discussion with the community, there is a recognition that it is often the community of South Uist that is affected. So they have promised to review that route prioritisation matrix, and we will, of course, make sure that Parliament are also updated. So we do recognise the impact on island communities. That's why I've said we will look to see what more we can do to support the community, including businesses. And what we will continue to do is make sure we invest in those 6 new major vessels that will serve Scotland's ferry network by 2026.
Douglas Ross.
Well, the First Minister's saying there that CalMac are looking to review it. Actually, their Chief Executive is going to the island next week to explain the matrix to islanders. He's going to explain why their services have been cut off for an entire month. But this disruption is not just affecting South Uist. It's destroying the way of life across many of Scotland's island and coastal communities. We spoke to a shop owner in North Uist, Louise Cook, who told us this. I'm really at my wit's end with all the disruption caused by our ageing ferry fleet and the horrific impact it's having on my business. When I should be increasing staff hours, I've had to cut them drastically. She finished by saying it's utterly appalling and really upsetting. So does the First Minister accept and hear what Louise is saying? And does he understand how many jobs his failures are costing?
First Minister.
I'm happy to repeat for the third time that, of course, I do, and we do as a government, not just understand, but we're doing everything we can alongside CalMac to ensure that there isn't that disruption to island communities. So, yes, I do recognise what Louise has said, what others have said. I've read many comments from businesses in South Uist that have been impacted and have been affected. And that's why we have taken measures across our term in government to try to bolster that ferry network. We bought and deployed an additional vessel in the MV Loch Freesa. We chartered the MV Arrow to provide additional resilience and capacity. We commissioned 2 new vessels for Isla, commissioned 2 new vessels for the Little Minch route, progressed investment in key ports and harbours, and confirmed additional revenue funding for the operation of local authority ferry services as well. And, of course, I've already mentioned the fact that CalMac spent £9 million, some of that money, of course, coming from the deductions from CalMac to charter the MV Alfred, which again is adding to the resilience of the network. But where there are failings, and clearly there has been a failing in this case, then we know it's often the community of South Uist, because of that prioritisation matrix, that is, of course, affected. And therefore, I can confirm that that route prioritisation matrix will absolutely be reviewed, so that in the future, if there are those unfortunate occasions where there is a breakdown of a ferry, then it is not always that community that is impacted.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister got annoyed that he's having to repeat what he said. I'm getting annoyed that there are so many cases of so many businesses and so many individuals affected by this throughout our island communities. And the blame lies squarely at the door of the SNP. The failure of Humza Yousaf Party to build a working ferry network is causing chaos. We spoke to Eileen MacDonald of the Doonbraes Hotel on the Isle of Skye. She said this: enough is enough. The island is in such a terrible way. Hotel bookings are down more than 50%. In 40 years of living on Lewis, there is no vibrancy. We are in despair. We cannot be fobbed off with empty words any longer. The First Minister needs to give Eileen and everyone else in our island communities more than empty words. The SNP's failure to deliver a working ferry network is ruining lives, damaging businesses, costing jobs and driving islanders to despair. So why shouldn't everyone affected be compensated for the SNP's mistakes?
First Minister.
There is I'm not saying this out of frustration. I am doing this to emphasise and re-emphasise that the Scottish Government absolutely understands the concern of many of the islanders that have been affected, and including, of course, the most recent example given by Douglas Ross in the question that he has just asked. So we are investing, of course, in the ferry network. I've already given examples of the action that we have taken, and of course the fact that we have committed investment to and look forward to 6 new ferries being part of the network up to 2026. In terms of the questions of compensation, and it's a very fair question, of course, for islanders to ask, a very fair question, of course, for Douglas Ross to raise here too. I have looked at the issue around compensation, but what I would say, and I'm happy, of course, to re-examine the issue, but any such scheme would need to be carefully considered, because it then would require a very stark choice to be made about those funding priorities, because we fund those penalties, the deductions that we take from CalMac, into the resilience of the network, such as, for example, chartering the MV Alfred. So yes, I completely understand the impact and the effect that this is having, this disruption is having on the community of South Uist. We will continue, Presiding Officer, to engage with the communities of South Uist, and where we can support businesses and livelihoods, I will absolutely explore what more can be done.